Join us to get exclusive and rare access to some of the industry's best leaders. Leaders who will share all their secrets to success with you. Leaders who have closed thousands of successful deals between them, generating hundreds of billions of dollars. Leaders giving you the roadmap to fast track your career and reach the highest echelons of the business. So welcome to Series 2 of the Investment Banking Leaders Podcast, and best of luck on your growth journey. I'm Pete Nieberg, your host of the Investment Banking Leaders Podcast and the Global Head at Altrum. And before this episode starts, I have a small favour to ask of you. Just over 20% of our listeners subscribe to the show, and our goal in Series 2 is to increase that to 40%. So if you've ever liked any of our episodes, our content, please hit subscribe. It helps this channel more than you can know, and the bigger the channel gets, the more high-profile leaders we can collaborate with to help you further on your journey. So thank you for the support. We also appreciate that you're really busy, and based on Series 1 feedback, we've added timestamps to all of our video content, making it much easier for you to access topics to get your help quickly. So enjoy the episode. I am excited to introduce today's guest to you. I'm here with Dominic Lester, the EMEA Head of Investment Banking and the Joint Global Head of Technology at Jefferies here in London. And Dominic has over 32 years of investment banking experience. He is a TMT expert and a leading deal maker, advising companies on over 50 billion of transactions in technology, internet, media, and the telecommunications industries worldwide. Dominic began his career at a boutique M&A shop called Dillon Read in New York before moving to UBS, where he spent 20 years growing his career to the managing director level. He then joined Jefferies in 2010 to head the TMT division before taking on the enlarged role of leading Jefferies investment banking in Europe, Middle East and Africa. In his current role, he's overseen Jefferies' impressive growth in the region as they continue to target a place as a top 6 investment bank. He's responsible for hiring, motivating, creating the vision, setting goals, and fostering a culture that supports collaboration and achievement, among many other things. But despite this, having got to know Dominic, he really believes a leader should lead from the front, so he continues to focus on delivering exceptional value for his clients. He speaks 5 languages fluently and has lived in several different countries, allowing him to be a cultural chameleon, something that has shaped the success of his career to date. So it's definitely fair to say that Dominic understands a thing or two about succeeding in the industry. But not only that, he's really enthusiastic about sharing more of the industry with you all, as well as helping you grow and develop. So I'm pumped he took time out of his schedule to be here with us today. So welcome to the Investment Banking Leaders Podcast, Dominic, and thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
So why don't we just start off with you introducing Jefferies and what you do for your clients to the audience?
So Jefferies today is one of the larger investment banks. We're now probably number 5 or 6 globally. We weren't always that large. The firm has grown tremendously over the past decade in particular. And we've done that by being really the only pure play investment bank that's also full service. What I mean by that is we're not a wealth manager. We're not a commercial bank. We really focus on M&A and capital markets advice for our clients. And we're full service in that we actually have a capital markets business, unlike some of the M&A boutiques, including the firm that I mentioned that I started my career with, that don't really have equities, sales and distribution, leverage finance. So we really are what you would call a classic investment bank. Most of the names that you'd be familiar with are now part of larger commercial banks. So we're extremely focused on what we do.
Yeah, congrats. Thanks for the introduction. I think that definitely helps. And congrats on the growth. As I said, I know you've been growing out the EMEA region, and as well globally, Jefferies has really grown at a fast rate. So congrats on that. How did you end up in investment banking? I think that's always an interesting question.
I have fairly varied interests, including a more artistic bent, but I always wanted to be a businessman, partly because I felt I needed to make a living. I knew I wouldn't make a living as an artist, although I might enjoy myself. And I felt investment banking was the best way to learn about how to do business. I like the fact that it's a fairly fast-paced environment where you're doing deals. It's unlike, if you take 2 other ends of the spectrum, if you're a trader, it's all about being fast-paced and making quick decisions and moving in and out of situations. If you take the other end of the spectrum, say a research job, more intellectual maybe, not the same pace, but really, or even consulting, I'd say, but not the same. Investment banking to me was a perfect blend of intellectual stimulation and activity. So I've never been bored since I started my career 33 years ago.
It's great that you found that. And I hear a lot about variety and pace and the dynamic nature of the industry, keeping those with longevity in the industry for so long. So thanks for sharing. And before we get into the meat of today's discussion, why not tell me something unknown, unexpected that our audience wouldn't know about you?
Yeah, I think one of the things you have to do in our job is deal with a lot of information and somehow package it up to persuade people to do or help them important decisions. I've always been lucky in that I have you may not know this about me, but I do have a bit of a photographic memory. So it's quite easy for me to remember things. A particular aspect of my mind, which is called synesthesia. Nobody knows what the hell that means, but what it means is I associate letters and numbers with specific colors. So
Wow.
my mind is quite visually orientated, and it helps me when I'm giving advice to clients. It helps me imagine the art of the possible and also remember facts and figures. Again, in an industry where you have to remember a lot of things. So that's given me a big advantage in terms of being able to think through the type of advice that we give our clients.
That's super interesting. And yeah, I can see why that would be a powerful skill, especially when you're collaborating with clients. Obviously, many won't have that skill. So is there tips that you give those that work with you to improve their memory or save key bits of information to help them tell the story better with their client or persuade their clients better?
Yeah, I think be organized in this job because you're overloaded with data. And so you have to make sure you always keep things in the right categories to be able to retrieve that information and use it appropriately. And also try to simplify the message. I think the best advice is always pretty straightforward. I think some advisors believe that the more complex the answer, the better the answer. But actually, the best answers are usually pretty straightforward. So our job in what we do is to take a lot of complexity provided by accountants and lawyers and consultants that may end up only just confusing the client. And what we try to do, reduce it down to the key messages that can be well understood by the client and make sense to them. And I think if you always try to extract the meaning of information, whether you're putting a presentation together or you're running through some analysis and edit out all the noise, it makes your life a lot easier. I just think I always try to tell people who work in this business, make sure you understand what you're working through. And if you don't understand, ask the questions that you need to ask, and then you'll feel much more comfortable with the information that you have from the standpoint of a client taking advice or from the standpoint of an investment banker giving advice.
Love that. What a great start. Organization, of course, and reducing to the key message and really understanding the meaning of what you're looking at. I couldn't agree more. And I think you've got to be curious. I think sometimes I'm happier when I've got a lot of people around me asking questions because then they're seeking the right
Yeah.
answer and to understand versus worrying about whether it's the right question or not. To jump into deals a little bit, as we said in the intro, $250 billion of transactions across a few industries. Can you tell me, having closed so many successful deals, what are the keys to success in your opinion?
I always say sometimes the most successful deal is one where both sides are equally slightly unhappy. It's not a zero sum game when you're trying to put deals together. You really have to find a way to satisfy both sides of a transaction, a buyer and a seller, whatever it may be. And you've got to find common ground. There's always a solution to a situation. People may come with a different opinion, and your job as an advisor to try to find that, not the middle ground, but effectively come up with a solution that's actually satisfactory to both sides. We've advised companies that are owned by families. Those are the most difficult ones because things get very emotional. Sometimes the multiple family members, I can think of a particular transaction, and their people get in the way who don't want a deal to happen. So you could also figure out who's standing in the way. Sometimes it's not a parent who may be standing in the way. It may be an individual whose job is at risk if a deal happens. So you've got to identify also the impediments while at the same time you're trying to bring people together. Yeah, at the end of the day, it's all about people. It's understanding people's emotions, understanding what their objectives are, making them feel good about a particular situation by maybe reframing it in a particular way. But it really is, it's not about the numbers. It's about the people at the end of the day.
Yeah, I hear that a lot from many successful leaders that the industry is very much about people, and it certainly resonates with me. And again, I like your take, making sure, looking at both sides and trying to find that common ground. And I guess that's where persuasion comes in. I know speaking to you previously the art of persuasion, the power of persuasion, you believe is really key to success. Can you talk a bit about that, and also maybe a bit about how to build skills in that area if you don't have them?
Yeah, I think there's a great book that everyone should read called How to Influence People and Make Friends, which was written in the 1930s.
Dale Carnegie, right?
Dale Carnegie, exactly.
Great book.
And you have to remember that every person needs to feel important. In order to persuade people, you've got to make them understand that whatever it is that you'd like them to do is actually in their best interest, not in your best interest. And again, it's about framing the situation so they understand that. Good to give people an opportunity to speak first before you start pushing someone in a particular direction. That's going to help you, I think, establish where they're coming from, what they're thinking. If I go into a meeting and I have a particular objective, what I don't do is I don't go in and immediately start persuading the individual. What I try to do is maybe ask a few questions, test them out, see where they're coming from, and then that helps me determine or approach the situation. But again, it comes back to keeping the message really simple, helping the other side understand what they get out of it, not have them focus on what you're going to get out of it. Because if they feel like you're coming with an agenda that's basically self-serving, they'll immediately put up their barriers and resist. So there's many different aspects. But I think we tell our younger bankers that the difference between a managing director or a senior partner in a business such as ours and someone at a more junior level is that it's not about whether you have the technical skills or even the work ethic. It's about whether you have those powers of persuasion, whether it's something as self-serving from a banker's perspective as making sure you get the right fee for the advice that you're getting and explaining why, not feeling bad about that. By the way, you can never persuade someone to do something if you don't believe it yourself. First of all, you better believe it. Otherwise, don't even try to persuade people to do it, because it's going to be pretty clear that you don't believe it yourself. Or just help persuading a client to avoid a problem or deal with an issue that they may not be aware of. And you're going to make sure that they feel like they already know where you're coming from and what you're going to say. They're going to tune out. So the other thing is, in terms of being persuasive, is not to be predictable, because if you're predictable, then they're gonna tune out and they're gonna think, okay, I know what he's saying, and they're not gonna even let you finish what you're saying. They're gonna be thinking already what they want to say back. Being persuasive means also having something to say that is actually interesting, because if you don't say something interesting, they know what you're saying next and they're gonna tune out.
That's great. And I guess you have to be adaptable, right? As you said, if you're applying that listen first, really trying to understand what's of value to that person versus coming in with your pitch and being really rigid, I guess is not going to help. But I took some notes.
A great meeting, one where the other side is doing all the talking. I know whenever I meet with a client and the client does most of the talking, they come out of that meeting feeling really good about the meeting because they got to talk. I know that when I do all the talking and I come out of the meeting thinking I feel pretty good about myself because I've just told them everything I have to say and that showed them how smart I am, most likely will find it a pretty lousy meeting because all they did was listen to me blabbing on.
Great advice for, I think, everyone listening. And I took notes. People need to feel important, frame the situation, listen first, ask the right questions, help them understand what is good for them, what they'll get out of it, and have that belief. Don't be predictable. So we'll definitely drop the Dale Carnegie book in the notes as well for those listening. If you haven't picked it up, it is a great read and really relevant today still. Obviously, our listeners are looking to be successful and become successful leaders. So could you share a little bit about what you feel are the main challenges that investment bankers are facing today? And I guess the second part of that is, what advice do you have to tackle these challenges?
I think the challenge with any job is the fact that to be successful, you have to work extremely hard. And while you're working hard, if you don't have sight of the destination and where you're heading, and you're focused just on how hard it is and the task at hand, you can get pretty easily demotivated. It's a little bit like climbing a mountain. If you know your goal is to reach the summit, you'll endure a lot of pain. But if you're thinking about every step that you put in front of you, it's going to be a pretty painful experience. So I think that's overall, that applies to any job. And people say investment banking is longer hours than most jobs. The reality is any job, if you're going to be successful, is lots of hours. So that's one of the great challenges. The other thing is, again, is to step back along the same lines of what I just said and understand why you're doing something. If you look at making a movie, for example, there are so many takes for a 3-minute slot of the finished article. Nobody ever sees the work that goes into it. It's the same in this job or any other job. So the key thing is not to get discouraged and to realize that there's going to be a lot of trial and error, there's a lot of mistakes made, there are going to be a lot of setbacks, and you have to pick yourself up again and do it all over again and keep going. So persistence is ultimately the secret to success in any job, particularly this one. And I just see too many people give up too quickly, say, I've done my 2 years, it's been a slog and it's been really tough, and they don't realize that it's going to get better and better, but you really don't want to give up too soon. And that's one thing I learned. I actually started this job thinking I'd do a couple of years, absorb a lot of information, and then do something else. And then I realized that every year that went by, there was so much more to learn. And even now, after 30 plus years, I find that the best years are still ahead of me because I've assimilated all this knowledge and capability, and I can do more with it. It's no different in a sport. If you're a musician, you just have to stick with it and keep going, and you'll get better and better. And it's the other expression, the other quote that I love from Winston Churchill is the quote that success is going from failure to failure with no loss of enthusiasm. And it's the same thing in this job.
Great quote. And I think you're right. I was reading a book recently that was talking about you need to out-fail your competition. You need to keep trying things and being persistent with it. So definitely connects with me. So interested on the destination part. Is that just goal setting? Is it thinking about the next steps in your career early? What is that? For our listeners today that maybe think, yeah, I connect with what Dominic's saying. I'm a bit demotivated. I don't really see the destination. Any advice there or tips?
Well, I think as a leader, and I'm in a position where I have to be a leader. My job is I have to every day paint the picture of what we're trying to achieve. As human beings, we live by stories, whether it's religion, what have you, right? We motivate ourselves because we believe in a story and we feel that we're part of that story. But if that story hasn't been articulated for you, then you have to articulate it for yourself. So you have to ask yourself, what am I doing and why am I doing it? And so I do think you have to have a destination and a goal. I make sure I always have objectives that give me something to look forward to. Because if you don't have anything to look forward to, you're going to be depressed by definition. Again, another quote, I hate keeping quotes, but they say that depression is the inability to imagine a future. So you have to imagine your future, picture yourself in terms of what you're trying to achieve, and create that goal for yourself. That's going to motivate you to do things. If you don't do that, and you're just going through the drudgery of day to day, one step at a time. The same thing is when you're getting instruction. If somebody just gives you a bunch of instructions, but you don't see the picture as to where it all fits in and what the purpose of those instructions are, you'll get demotivated because it's just a series of tasks. But if the tasks, so you have to ask the question when somebody gives you a bunch of tasks, you say, well, why? What are we trying to achieve? That will always also give you the ability to then maybe modify those tasks, because whoever's giving you those tasks probably hasn't thought it through as much as you're going to think it through when you're actually performing those tasks. So it's your obligation when you get a bunch of instructions to sit there and think, why am I doing this? And then when you focus on the why, you'll come back and say, of the 8 tasks that you gave me, there's really only 5 that make a lot of sense. I've thought about the other 3 and they're a waste of time. And I bet you that whoever gave you those tasks will turn around and say, thank you for thinking about that. Yes, you're right. We only need 5 of those tasks. That'll also save you a lot of time. So it's always understanding your destination is going to motivate you, is going to help you save time. It'll help make everything more efficient.
Yeah, what great advice. And I guess when you understand it, how empowering that must be to have thought it through, understood the why, and then been able to improve by not doing all the tasks or seeing a better way to do it. I can definitely see that. I know you're a big believer about the right company and the right platform to succeed, and that being really important. Can we talk a bit about that? How important is it for those listening to find the right company and platform?
I think if you look at the success of anyone, a lot of it has to be being in the right place at the right time. And it's a little bit like being on the Titanic. Doesn't matter what you do. If the Titanic's going down and you're on it, you're going to go down with it. And so people don't always focus on the bigger picture of where they are. And I think you have to always, first of all, you have to adapt to your environment, to the time that you're in, and try to always understand what's changing and how do I adapt with those changes so that you don't end up being taken down with the Titanic. But I think it's the same thing with the company that you work for and the people that you work for. You've got to constantly make sure you're you're behind the right leaders. And the success of a company, which is just an agglomeration of individuals, does come down to the leaders at the end of the day. Those leaders set the agenda, they set the direction, and the organization then follows. Company is nothing more than a collection of individuals. And I took my inspiration when I joined Jefferies from the people who run the firm. It was pretty clear to me that they knew exactly what they were doing, but also more importantly, that over the past, they'd continually adapted. So no plan was sacred. Plans can only be as good as the moment. As circumstances change, you've got to be able to change the plan and not be dogmatic about sticking with a particular plan. A company is about an organization that is able to set the right agenda with the right leaders, but also be able to adapt. And the problem with our industry is a lot of the big companies have gotten too big. In the financial services industry, which is a very complex industry, there are, in my opinion, diseconomies of scale. You get to be too big, you then become too bureaucratic, and therefore you're not able to shift and duck and dive as you need to what is a very dynamic and changing environment, particularly over the past 20 years. If you think of some of the shifts that have happened, they've been pretty dramatic and completely unforeseen. And we'll continue to see those. And the changes happen not only more often, but they happen more rapidly and in greater scale. So I think it's very important to be in an organization that can adapt. The right organization and one that can adapt. And then, of course, within that, you have to adapt yourself.
Again, really connect with that. If I'm an analyst or associate listening today, or maybe a VP, is your advice to look at the leaders, look around the company, do my research to make sure the platform I'm joining, I connect more with what the leaders are doing and whether they're adaptable or not? Or is there something else that you recommend?
I think the leadership is absolutely essential, and it's probably the most important factor. You look at any company, bad leaders create bad companies and good leaders create great companies. So I think the leadership is key. I think you also have to assess the elements of a business. I mean, you can have great leaders, but the company may be lacking certain essential elements, or it may just be in the wrong industry. You put a great leader in a company in the wrong industry, then there's not much that that leader can do other than maybe keep the company alive. But I think leadership is key. And in our industry, one of the great leaders is the CEO of JP Morgan, not to advertise one of our competitors, but one of the reasons why JP Morgan has been so successful is they've had the same CEO who's had a consistent track record of success. He's also adapted to the environment, and he's probably one of the rarest examples of a large financial organization that has been able to continue to thrive. Now, JP Morgan is now the US government effectively, but he should take a lot of credit for the success of JP Morgan, because JP Morgan, before the financial crisis in 2008, was not considered a leading financial institution. But how he adapted to and took advantage of that seismic event in our industry is what made JP Morgan a great firm. And Jefferies, on a much smaller scale, did the same thing. During the financial crisis, a lot of our competitors, including the likes of Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley and Merrill Lynch, they all got bailed out by the US government and became bank holding companies. JP Morgan was really the leader in terms of scale, in terms of taking advantage of that situation. And on the other end of the spectrum, Jefferies was the other firm that was able to take advantage of that crisis to attract some of the strongest talent. And that all comes down to the decisions made by the leaders.
Nice. Yeah. And I've got a lot of connections at JP Morgan here in London. And when Jamie Dimon comes to visit, you see the excitement amongst them. He's, like you say, a really unique leader. So let's talk a bit about attracting talent. You've given me a bit of a recipe. Look for the leaders. I know you've been a big part of growing the talent at Jefferies across the last few years in EMEA. So how have you attracted talent?
The reality is it's very difficult to get someone to move in their jobs as an investment banker unless there's a big push factor for them, because actually investment bankers are by nature fairly risk averse, not because they're weak people, but because they probably have too much information and overthink things, and therefore always see the downside. And to a certain extent, we're also paid to help clients avoid problems. So we naturally tend to be fairly risk averse. So, and there's very few good investment bankers that are just, people that say, yeah, I'm just going to go for it. And so you have to capture people at the right time. And I think that's probably the most, and you have to build a relationship with them. It takes a long time to persuade someone to do something as significant as changing jobs, because there is a lot of risk involved. It's never easy, no matter what. So one, we try to get them at the right time. Two, we build a relationship with them. On average, it takes 6 months of getting to know each other before you make that decision, because it's a little bit like getting married. You're going to live with these people. They're going to live with you, and you're going to live with them. So you really have to get to know each other and feel comfortable. And then in many cases, to the dislike by our competitors, usually when we hire people, we hire them in teams. So we welcome teams. In fact, we think that, first of all, good bankers tend to have a following, and they also feel more comfortable if they can move with their team. We try to do that. At the more junior level, what we're looking for is individuals that want to make a difference, that are less focused on the brand per se, and prefer to be in a smaller environment where they can make a bigger impact. There, it's just about helping them understand the excitement of being part of a smaller organization where you have more exposure, of being part of a firm that is already, we think, a great firm today, but will be even greater in the future, so they can look back one day and say, look, at not only did I do very well at Jefferies, but I joined Jefferies when most people didn't know who the hell they are, and now it's a great firm. So people who have that kind of bent and mindset to be more of a challenger environment, that want to storm the castle rather than defend the castle. To me, that was the most important thing. I would never join, I never have joined one of the established top players, because the ability to make an impact is de minimis, and you spend all your time defending your market share rather than taking market share. So I'd rather be on the offensive and play smart offense, as we always say, than be on the defensive. And so we try to find people that have that natural inclination that are happy to go on the offensive.
Like that, make the difference, have an impact, be a bit more creative, and I'm sure that's more engaging, of course, as well. I mentioned it at the start. I know part of your role is to get teams to work together cohesively, and I imagine if you're getting an MD to come across and a whole team, and then that's integrating into a wider department or a bigger group of people. So can you talk to me about what you've learned about getting people to work cohesively together?
Sometimes you have to force it, because the problem with many investment bankers is that they all think that they're smarter than anyone else, and that nobody else adds value. So you have to force them together to see actually that other individual as part of a team is going to add value, mostly because they probably do things that you don't know how to do, and therefore you don't know what good is until you see someone else doing it. So we have to force it. But once people work together just once and they see the power of that, then they realize it's okay. So it's not a huge challenge, to be honest with you, because everyone likes help, but they want to feel like they are getting help, as opposed to someone glomming onto their deal or trying to take credit for the work that they do. So the challenge is to make sure that it's the right teams where each individual plays but I always use also the analogy of the Beatles, which is, if you look at any of the Beatles individually, while some were greater than others, none of them were really as great as they were as when they were together, because each of the Beatles had a very distinct role. And clients like to see that, right? Clients like to see a team that gets along well, where everyone trusts each other and respects each other, and they all bring something special to the table. That's incredibly seductive to a client. What is less seductive is an individual who thinks that they know it all, can do it all. People like teams. And actually, sometimes we obviously have very capable bankers who stand out. Sometimes the best thing is when a client says, I've had an amazing experience with Jefferies, and then you ask them, who's your banker at Jefferies? And say, it's not one person, it's really a whole team, as opposed to saying, yeah, I only deal with so at a particular bank. So it's a team sport. And I think once people get a feel for it and they start trusting each other, the experience of being part of a team is always a pleasant one if you feel like everyone's contributing.
And are you really specific about when you're building the team that everyone's got different skills, or is it once you've got the team, you're then looking to train people in different areas? Any advice there for those that are in team building roles at the moment?
Yeah, I think the industry has evolved from when I started, in that we have a lot of specialization. So on the one hand, that's very good. So if I'm assembling a team for a pitch or for a deal, it's pretty easy to say, okay, I need a specialist with Middle Eastern investors. I need a specialist in how to list a company in the UK. I need a specialist in that particular sector, whatever it may be. It's not that difficult to assemble the right team with all these specialists, but at the same time, you have to also let it happen organically, because frankly, it's not always good to just have a bunch of specialists, because then they don't necessarily have common ground. So sometimes you don't need that specialist. And by the way, some of the best bankers realize that being too much of a specialist and becoming too narrow-minded isn't a good thing. So we try to get the balance of individuals who both have an area of expertise, but also try to develop their broader skill set so they don't become just a one-trick pony.
Yeah, I had a leader on the podcast in series 2 that talked a lot about versatility and really putting yourself out there to acquire more skills and knowledge to make yourself more attractive and more useful, more valuable to the team. So that definitely
Well, I think
resonates
the
with me.
other thing that's important is as you become more senior, a leader cannot be a specialist. A leader has to, because if you're too much of a specialist, you can't lead by definition, because you're going to have people with a different skill set that you may not necessarily relate to or understand. And so you've got to get as you become more of a leader, you've got to abandon the tendency of a specialist to know every detail about everything and get comfortable knowing enough, but actually, sometimes having to tap dance a little bit to get things done. You've got to, and that in and of itself is a challenge. So some of the specialists are not necessarily leaders. The best leaders, knowing too much about one thing isn't necessarily a good thing if you have to be a leader. You've got to know just enough about everything, but not too much about anything in particular.
I always heard, I can't remember what book it was in, about the leader just needs to know all the people, all the right people for when they get the right question, not know it all. So that, again, resonates with me. I want to sit a little bit on success. Obviously, Altrum, we're a recognition business, and we all know that recognition is a key part to building any successful culture. So you talk a bit about how you recognize success in your teams?
There's the very sort of crude way of doing it, which is financial results. I think that is obviously incredibly important to us. The other thing that we recognize as success is the ability to develop people internally and nurture them and make them feel good about their own careers. So I think a team that has great financial results but has a lot of churn isn't a healthy team, and eventually that will catch up on itself. But a team where the leaders who are obviously focused on generating business at the same time creating a positive culture in that team, where there's no infighting, there's no negative sentiment, nobody's being bullied. That's incredibly important. We try to recognize that, because it is a people business at the end of the day. And if we don't develop the right culture, eventually the business will implode. It's not about the people at the top, it's about the people across all the way down through the stack. And so if one of the senior bankers come to me and says, look, I have a problem with my junior people, they're not showing me the kind of respect that I expect, I turn to them and say, then you're going to have to get their respect. It's not for me to fix that for you. There's no way I can respect you if you don't have the respect of the people who work for you. So that is a very important thing, is that there is respect coming from the bottom up, and also that you have a continuous cycle of improvement where a good person hires usually somebody who's better below them, smarter than them, as opposed to the other way around, so that over time the organization gets stronger and stronger as people move up. In many poor organizations, people do the opposite. So you can judge someone not just by their financial success, but their ability to motivate, recruit, attract, and lead people below them that are eventually going to be even better than they are as they move up.
Yeah, agreed. And you touched on motivation at the end there. So let maybe sit there for a minute. Having built teams out and had to motivate and set vision, what's your take? What's your best advice for motivating members of the team as a leader?
You have to, apart from the storytelling that I talked about, where you may be talking to a group at the same time, you have to spend time with people one-on-one. I spend a lot of time already this week. I've had one dinner and I have another one where I literally had a one-on-one dinner with one of the people who had been going through a tough time, just because, one, he's very busy, two, they had some issues in the team, and three, he's starting to think about his future. He just needed to sit down with me and tell me what was on his mind and let it come out. He wasn't necessarily looking for any solutions. He just needed to talk. And you have to spend time with people all the time to motivate them. If you're not spending time with them, if they don't have an opportunity to tell you what's on their minds, everyone has worries, everyone has paranoias, everyone has fears. If you don't sit down and talk to them and let them talk about those concerns that they have and listen to them, just by listening to them and them seeing your reaction, the concern goes away. I had someone recently want to sit down with me because he was concerned that we were going to promote someone ahead of him, and that was weighing on him. I didn't know it was a concern to him at all, because I've never said anything or did anything that would suggest that I would promote one of his partners above him. But he felt that way. He talked to me about it. He could see immediately looking in my face that it was not a legitimate concern, and the concern went away. So I think it's critical that you do that you spend time with people, hearing them out all the time. It's like a relationship, right? If you're married to someone, it's the other great story about the person with a nail in the head said, I've got a headache. And the partner's saying, you got a nail in your head. And she says to him, no, why do you always have to give me the solution? I just want to talk about it. It's like, fine, okay, that's what it's about.
Yeah. Spend time with people, really listen, back to that listening you mentioned at the top of the session. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. I think a couple more questions I have around leadership, and then I'd like to dive into culture a little bit. What's helped you develop as a leader? Is it training, mentors, books, podcasts, all of the above? What's really helped you grow and develop?
I read quite a bit. I'm fascinated by biographies. Currently, I'm reading a couple biographies of Napoleon just because the movie came out recently. My father was always fascinated by Napoleon, but I've always tried to understand what is it that makes certain people successful. Autobiographies are the best because when people talk about themselves, you learn quite a bit. Not all the information is accurate, but you could see by the way they write about their achievements and how they think about life, how they think about things. So to me, it's been really interesting to not just observe leaders around me that I work with, but it's difficult to do, right? When you're just observing a leader in the moment, you only see a snapshot. It's like you're watching the Formula One. If you're in one spot, you just see the car go by. You've got to be able to follow the car around the track. So I think actually reading books about individuals and understanding where they came from, their backgrounds, what motivated them, etc. That to me has always been fascinating. I'm also fascinated by history because I like to understand why things happen and where. And so I think you learn about leadership by observing other leaders, but the best way to observe other leaders is to read about them, ideally in an autobiography or a biography. So pick someone that you're motivated by and read the book.
I'll ask you after the episode if there's any particular ones that really struck a chord with you. We'll put them in the show notes for others to read as well. And hopefully today they're learning a lot about your leadership style, and I'm sure they can take that away and help them. What do you think are the biggest opportunities for leaders in investment banking today?
I think investment banking isn't particularly well known for leadership because it's a bit of a dog-eat-dog world. But I do think things are changing. The way young people work today is different to the way I used to work when I was younger, and people want to have a more balanced life. They want to be more treated as individuals. This industry used to be very conformist, and I'm dressed in my suit and whatever. But increasingly, industry has become more diverse. I think the opportunity for leaders to embrace that more. I still think there's a sort of a stereotype of what an investment banker is, how they dress, how they speak, what they look like, and what they do. It's still very much of a macho culture, making it more difficult for women to succeed in this industry. And it doesn't need to be a macho culture, right? So I think there's an opportunity for people with slightly more thoughtful approach, more of a focus on being well-rounded while at the same time working hard, taking care of your health. That's become more accepted today, but in the past, people used to brag about how little sleep they got and the fact they never take any holidays. And the more pale I look very tan right now because I was on holiday recently, but the more pale and tired you looked, the more the assumption was that you were getting things done. So I think there's an opportunity to change that and for all leaders in this industry.
The all-night badge of honor, right, that we've heard about in the past. I think diversity within the team was something you mentioned as a strength, so I can see why that plays into that as well as a leader, being aware to different characters coming in and having an impact. So yeah, definitely relates. If I'm a VP that's really looking to take that final step up to senior VP or into the MD realms, what advice would you give to them to be successful?
The VP position is a very tough one because at the same time you have to be on top of all the details, but also think big picture. So you're in that transition phase. You have to start thinking about how you develop your own client base and your own relationships. I would say in investment banking, to be successful, you have to have relationships and you have to be able to originate business. It's never too soon to start developing those relationships. And frankly, the people who are your peers will eventually become your clients. And you'll know who those people are because they're successful from day one, right? So I think the first thing is you really need to seek out and spend time with successful people at your own level and ideally nurture and develop those relationships with people more senior than you. But also you have to everyone focuses on relationships and let me prove that I can bring in a piece of business and that I know so and whatnot. But at the end of the day, you need to make sure that you work on important transactions from which you're going to learn. You're only going to be as good as your actual experience doing deals, as opposed to who you know and how you network. You actually have to have the experience, because that's what's going to teach you what needs to happen next. There's no set of instructions for a particular deal in our industry. Everything, what you need to do by virtue of your experience. So my advice to all VPs is, don't worry too much. Build relationships, stay in touch with people, follow up with people, cultivate that network. And you never know who's going to be successful and who's going to be important to you in the future, but maintain those connections and don't forget about that, and build a habit of being able to do that. If you're on holiday and there's someone interesting or important, take the time to get to know them, because that may be a unique opportunity that you shouldn't let go. But at the same time, make sure you work on deals. If you have an opportunity to work on a big deal, because that experience in and of itself is going to make you jump leaps and bounds in terms of your skill set and your value in the future.
Yeah, building the knowledge along with the relationships. I can understand that, and I'm sure that's an important one to take away. I want to touch a little bit on culture. And one thing, chatting to you and getting to know you, and I mentioned it in the introduction, you're a cultural chameleon. You speak a lot of languages, you've lived in a lot of places, Rome, UK, US. So can you share how that has helped your career?
It's helped me in the job that I have. I was asked to build out the European business by a firm that's predominantly an American firm run by people who sit in the United States. So it's been a huge advantage to me, having started my career in the US, to both understand the way people think there, and at the same time, having grown up in multiple countries in Europe, understand how people think differently in different countries. And so I've been able to play the sort of the diplomat or the interpreter back and forth. And people, and again, when there's disagreements or different perspectives, I've been able to bridge those different perspectives. Again, by understanding both sides, you can figure out how to find common ground. That's been very valuable to me. Speaking languages helps as well, because we've built up a big business in Italy. I go down and see clients. My Italian is fluent, but I can't conduct a hyper complex business conversation in Italian, but I can build the personal relationships by having an informal, friendly conversation with someone, and then they're at ease when you speak their language, and they immediately feel like they relate to you. So that's been very helpful to me in bringing people together. And it also helps you just see different perspectives. I think when you speak different languages and you lived in different places, you have a broader perspective of the world. It's like traveling. Every time you travel, you think you know it all, and then you go to a place, that's new. More recently, I've been spending time in Dubai, where we've established an investment banking presence. I had no idea until I actually went down there how unbelievably dynamic the environment is, but also how the foundation of the culture of the Emiratis has been an open commercial mindset from the beginning, so different to most nations in that region. So I think, my perspective on people there and how I relate to them is very different. I only got that perspective by going there. So I always tell people, make sure you travel in your job. If you have an opportunity to get on a plane on a deal to go to New York, ask to go to that meeting. Even if it means when you come back, you're going to have even more work to do. I can't tell you how many people say, you know what, I got all this stuff to do. I'd rather do this rather than go to the meeting or get on a plane and fly somewhere. I can't afford to take 2 days traveling to Paris to do something. You have no idea what a mistake that is. You have to take every opportunity to go places and see things. You'll establish new connections, you get new perspectives, and your skill set will evolve and broaden.
Yeah, thanks. I'm well traveled, and I took a couple of years out to travel, and this really connects with me, this topic. And I don't speak many other languages, but being able to connect with people on a different level and understanding cultures, you get that from traveling as well. So yeah, definitely relate to that. And hopefully more of our listeners will take you up on that suggestion to get out more, and despite the workload, get to know other people.
You have to get out of your comfort zone, always. That's
Yeah.
the other thing you learn. By the way, the other thing that's important is when you're feeling comfortable, then you're in trouble. You're growing when you're uncomfortable. So I always make a point of making sure I'm always outside my comfort zone, always pushing myself. And being in an environment also where culturally you don't fit, it's a stressful thing, but actually you come out of it so much stronger.
Definitely agreed. What's when culture? We talked a lot about your superpower, if it were, about how to take on a lot of data and remember it and package it in different ways. What do you think is going to be the AI impact on culture within investment banking? And are you already seeing it?
It's interesting. I remember when I became a managing director in 2003, which is like now 21 years ago, I worked for a guy called Ken Moelis, who was my boss at the time at UBS in the US, and he's since set up his own boutique and been very successful. And I was very depressed because, first of all, we had the TMT bubble burst, and I was a TMT banker, and I thought it was the end of the world. Secondly, all this proliferation of data at people's fingertips. That was a period when Bloomberg became widely available, and I thought to myself, with all this information that's available, what's the value of the investment banker? Because what we deal in information, but the information is now at your fingertips with the internet, with Bloomberg. You push one button, they'll do all the analysis for you. And he said to me, the more information there is, the more valuable an individual who can actually interpret that information becomes, because information overload is a terrible thing. And therefore, what will happen is the best advisors will become even more valuable over time. The more technology there is, the more information that is. And the same thing applies to AI. As we all know, AI has a lot of flaws. AI is just an evolution of what's already been happening. It's just a lot of information just packaged in a different way and packaged more quickly. And soon we're going to have supercomputers that will be able to figure out every permutation and combination in seconds, etc. But the speed at which information is provided, or the quantum of that information, or it just means that the human ability to detect what's real and what's not real, and what matters and what doesn't matter, will become even more valuable, in my opinion. So I don't think I think of AI as purely an enabler. It means that we can focus more on the value add. The more technology we have, the more human beings focus on the value add. The kinds of things that had to be done manually that we don't have to do anymore. I can list those things and spend the next 5 days talking about them, but we don't think about them anymore because they happen naturally. And that has freed us up to do other things. So I think it's an enabler. I don't see it as a threat whatsoever to our job. Of course, if you're doing menial tasks, then you're going to get disintermediated. But that's why human beings need to continue to evolve. You can't be doing what can be done by a computer. So I think we'll just continue to evolve, and the value of the advice that we provide just goes up.
And are you seeing being implemented at Jefferies at all so far? Different AI initiatives
I
or
think
strategies?
we're starting to use AI to sort through our own information to produce documents that otherwise would have taken longer to produce. But I can't say it's really fundamentally changed what we do yet. It will. Today, for example, if I'm trying to figure out, even internally, if I need to figure out who's the expert in Scottish whiskey, and I don't know, it's very difficult for me to figure it out using our intranet. But just like you're conducting this interview with AI, you could conduct a 2-hour interview with someone, learn everything you need to know about them, put that into a language model whereby the next time somebody asks a question about who the expert in Scottish whiskey is, you'll find out in 2 seconds, because the way the data is stored is different. Those are the kinds of things that we're already working on to be able to leverage just the volumes of data and information that we have internally and help people get to the right answer quickly, as opposed to having to navigate through reams of data and talk to many people to get to the answer. Packaging up information that we learn when we meet with clients. We have a CRM system that we've developed in-house. The power of that CRM system to figure out who knows whom and who recently met with whom and what they learned, all of that is becoming much more efficient. It'll just speed up our ability to get to the right answer.
Thanks for sharing. It's such an interesting topic. And me, AI still feels a bit like an orchestra without a conductor. There's lots of instruments and lots of things out there, but it's lacking that conductor to really bring it all together in a way that makes sense.
Yes.
And I think we're going to live that for a little while as we all become more knowledgeable and we learn how we can apply it in the right way to have a positive impact. So thanks for sharing. I can't believe it. Time is flying by. So I'm going to move towards the wrap section of the interview. And I want to start with taking you down memory lane, if you will. So if you went back to your first day in the industry, or your first day or first week as an analyst at UBS, what piece of advice would you give yourself now, knowing what you know?
I think there were periods where I was very unhappy, and I can think of one period in particular, and I was just working for a person who I didn't relate to, and in a particular sector I wasn't interested in, and I suffered through it, as opposed to putting up my hand and saying, I'd like to do something else. Luckily, I got to do something else. An opportunity arose, and I took that opportunity. But I do think if you're unhappy, and I remember those days of misery where literally it was tough for me to get out of bed. I was having panic attacks at night, and I just took it. I could have fixed that I got to change my environment, and I just didn't do it quickly enough. So I'd say that when you have an issue, when you're unhappy, speak up, right? Make sure you speak to whoever it is that you work for and just say, look, this doesn't make me happy. Is there something else we can do? Is there something we can change? I think that's critical. The other thing that I did is I always saw the people and tried to learn from them, maybe even copy them, which is nothing wrong with that. There was someone in my office who was just unbelievable at building financial models. And I decided I wanted to understand what his financial models looked like, how he formatted them, how he did it. And I spent a lot of time asking him questions and trying to learn from him. He was a peer. Actually, he was younger than me. He was a year behind me. So you're surrounded by people who are capable and smart. And from day one, just get to know them, see what they're doing, see who does things well, and always follow talent, right? Figure out and learn from those people. Sit down with them and say, how do you do it differently? And you're going to learn. And just ask lots of questions. The other thing I always said is I refuse to put anything down on paper that I'm producing which I don't understand myself. But I'm a little bit anal that way. Again, back to my visualization. If there's something that's there that I don't feel I understand or control it, it's like screaming at me the whole time, and it makes me nervous, right? So I need to kind of quieten it down by understanding what it is. And so I think just take the time. Don't rush anything. The other thing I'll say is never if somebody imposes a deadline on you and you're not ready, just move the deadline. People always feel they can't move deadlines because it's imposed on them. God forbid they should say, I can't. If it means that you have to do an all-nighter to hit a deadline when actually you could just move it by a day and not do the... People always say, okay, fine. I had it recently with a client. The client sent me an email and said, where's the analysis from your team? We haven't received it yet. Felt we better get it to them tomorrow. I could have easily turned around and said, okay, guys, the client wants it now. We're all in all night. Let's get it done. Instead, I went back to the client and said, you really need it tomorrow? Can we do it next week? Because people are away for the Easter holidays. And they said, next week is fine. And we ended up with producing much better analysis. So you got to push back, not be unreasonable. And then the final thing is, that's the old, I forget which president said, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. Do ask yourself always, what can I do for the firm that I work for? Don't always, a lot of people think the company owes me this, the company owes me that, they owe me more time, they owe me a better health plan, they owe me a higher salary. Just, if you get in that mindset of feeling entitled and wanting your employer you feel the employer owes you things, that's a dangerous mindset to be in. And then the opposite will happen. If on the other hand you think, okay, what more can I do for the person I work for? How can I go beyond what they asked me to do? How can I improve? How can I surprise them with the unexpected of what I can produce that's beyond their expectations? People will love you and think that you're really special. So always try to surprise people. Don't be predictable. Don't surprise people to the upside. Don't do the bare minimum. Don't do exactly what you're told and nothing more. Just always do a little bit more, continuous improvement, and then people would think there's something magic about you.
Wow. So much great takeaways there. And thanks for being so candid about your tough time. It must have been a really tough time. And I think great advice to all to speak up when you're going through something like that and change your scenery. We talked about being in the right place, the right platform before. So I love that, and learning from others coming up again. And I think it's such a unique industry, investment banking, where you could be quite early in your career and yet have access to clients, some of the smartest minds, CEOs, really talented individuals. So like you said, learning from those building models internally or even externally, right? There's so much opportunity. And the last part really connects with me. What can you do versus what your employer needs to do for you? I think that's something I've lived by at Altrum, and it's helped me a lot, feeling better about the work I do and obviously being recognised by the team. So I think that's the best place to leave it. I don't want to ask any more questions now after that wrap. So all I want to say is, Dominic, thank you so much for joining us today. I know you're incredibly busy, so taking an hour or so out your day to help our listeners is much appreciated. Really enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you very much. Thanks for the opportunity.
This episode of the Investment Banking Leaders podcast was brought to you by Altrum, the global leaders in the financial deal gift, awards and recognition space. So if you need any assistance, don't be afraid to hit me up or the Altrum team. I really hope you enjoyed today's episode, and thanks for joining us. And until next time, best of luck on your growth journey.